Hi guys, Ricky Pope here, and today on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast, I talk with Adam Bray, best-selling author of nearly 20 official Star Wars, Marvel, and Lego books, plus scripture and nerdy news, and we'll get to all of that right after this. 2022 is flying by so fast, and I just reviewed my goals for the year. It's not too late to set some effective goals for 2022 for yourself. And the Goal Process 101 ebook helps you do just that. With a straightforward process and practical exercises, you'll be guided to set the right goals for you and set out a plan to achieve them. Get your copy of the Goal Process 101 ebook by going to goalprocess101.com. Use CNU2022 at checkout to save 10%. Now, back to the show. Before we get into the nerdy news and our interview with Adam Bray, let's read some scripture. This past Sunday was Father's Day, and it made me think about this set of scriptures. Proverbs 4, 1-9. Listen, my son, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. For I, too, was a son to my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. Then he taught me, and he said to me, take hold of my words with all your heart. Keep my commands, and you will live. Get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or turn away from them. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is this. Get wisdom. Though it cost you all you have, get understanding. Cherish her, and she will exalt you. Embrace her, and she will honor you. She will give you a garland to grace your head and present you with a glorious crown. Father's Day can cause lots of different emotions. For some, it brings great memories of times with a loving father. For others, it brings pain from loss or from a poor relationship or an absent father. I encourage each of you to remember, no matter what your earthly life has been like, we all have a loving and heavenly Father that wants to see the best for us, that is grieved when we fail, and rejoices with us when we return to Him. Now let's look at some nerdy news. According to The Hollywood Reporter, Marvel has begun development on a new Wonder Man series for Disney+, with Destin Daniel Cretton, the director of Shang-Chi, teaming up with Andrew Guest to write, the writers of Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Community. For those who don't know Wonder Man, he was first introduced in the 1960s as a villain in Marvel Comics and quickly became a hero and a founding member of the West Coast Avengers. And in his off time, he is an actor in Hollywood named Simon Williams. In the comics, he's very closely tied to Wanda and to the Vision, because Vision's personality and memory came from Wonder Man. Expect some huge changes in the origin in the MCU, since Vision's origin is completely different. Expect this also to be on the funnier side of Marvel, and if they go with the Hollywood actor idea, we might even get to see the return of comedian and actor Kamal Nanjiani, Kingo's character from The Eternals. Writer and director Rian Johnson announced the name of the Knives Out sequel on Twitter this week. We will see Daniel Clark return as Detective Benoit Blanc in a movie titled Glass Onion. He'll be joined by actors Dave Bautista, Edward Norton, Janelle Monáe, Catherine Hahn, Leslie Oldham Jr., Kate Houston, Madeline Klein, Jessica Henwick, and Ethan Hawke, just to name a few. With a title like Glass Onion, expect the plot to have many layers and to be handled in a very fragile way. Squid Game Season 2 has been greenlit by Netflix. It had been rumored and expected for some time because of how popular it was, the first season, but it's now official. Reports say that there will be some familiar faces returning, but there is little about the plot available and no explanation of who is now in charge of the Squid Game. Based on the timing of this announcement, I wouldn't expect to see it released before the end of 2023 and more likely early 2024. Well, this week I talked with author Adam Bray. We talked about how he got started as a freelance writer and then what it was like researching and writing for Marvel and Star Wars. You might have read some of his work like Star Wars: What Makes a Monster, Stormtroopers Beyond the Armor, the Marvel Studios Character Encyclopedia, or even Lego Star Wars Chronicles of the Force. Adam is a great guy, and if you are watching on YouTube, you might notice his internet connection was not great, but his audio is fantastic, so we're good there. But we were able to push through and have a great conversation. So let's get right into it. Adam Bray, it is so great to have you on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be on.
Well, so if you're watching or listening, we are working with some delay issues right now. So if things look a little awkward, that might be what you're seeing. But it kind of comes and goes, but just know about it. Hopefully I'll be able to edit most of it out and I won't have to leave this line in here. But just in case. So Adam, you have been a travel author. You've worked with Marvel and with Star Wars properties. You've just done so many things. How did you get into the writing thing? How did that become a thing for you?
Right. Originally, I was a web designer, and I went over to live in Southeast Asia since I could do that job from anywhere. That was, I guess, almost 20 years ago. So that was before the whole COVID thing. You know, I was doing working from remote before it was cool. But I made it cool, living in the tropics and doing my work on a beach and fancy beach resorts, also Thailand and China, just Cambodia, Vietnam. But as a hobby while I was over there, I made a tourism website for the beach resort where I lived, Hue, Vietnam. And I like to take some credit for it that when I moved there to Hue, kind of nobody had ever heard of it. But because I made this website just for fun with tourism information, it very quickly became the top resort destination in the entire country. And I was the only English-speaking expat, doing this, putting information out on the internet. So it was kind of, I had an exclusive on all of that. So I started getting noticed by travel publishers for doing that. And I also applied for a few to be a travel writer. And it took a year or two to actually hear back, but eventually some started asking me to update their travel guides. And so I became a travel writer, also freelancing for CNN, BBC, National Geographic, and other outlets. And did that for several years anyway, 4, 5, 6 years. But then when I wanted to come back to the U.S., it just happened that one of the travel publishers I worked with was DK, who does a lot of the Star Wars and Marvel guides. So I asked them if I could switch topics and it was at just the right time when George Lucas had sold Lucasfilm to Disney, so they were kind of rebooting the whole franchise and publishing a lot of new books. So it just kind of grew from there.
Very cool. And so, what books now? I know you've worked on a lot, but what books have you worked on for the Star Wars franchise?
I don't know how many of each. I know it's close to 20 for both Marvel and Star Wars. So I've done the first one was a little kids book called "What Makes a Monster," and then the next was the Rebels Visual Guide, and I did two of those. Then some of the others include Ultimate Star Wars. There's been two different editions. Star Wars, absolutely everything you need to know. Star Wars, the Visual Encyclopedia. Did a couple of Lego books. Feels like I'm forgetting something that I probably am. But they do special editions of those various ones too.
So, what is it like writing for something like Star Wars? Were you a big Star Wars fan before you started writing for them?
I was. I've been a lifelong fan since I first saw the original Star Wars in a drive-in theater as a little kid. I was born in '75, so I think I saw it at the drive-in when I was maybe 3 years old. Got a Millennium Falcon and all those original figures for the next birthday. And I loved it my whole life. So it was exciting and a little surreal to actually get my first Star Wars assignment. DK liked me because the first book was about Star Wars monsters, creatures, and I had a biology background working with chimps and other wildlife. So I was a good fit, they thought, for that. And I think my background helped with CNN and stuff, some of my bylines, so they felt comfortable with me. And for the Rebels Visual Guide, John Rinsler, the former executive editor, he interviewed me for that to check me out, to make sure everything was cool, and we got along great. So he would personally pass me a lot of work that I got. So it was great to enjoy his confidence as the head of publishing at Lucasfilm and someone that worked directly with George Lucas at times for his movie guides. So it's been great fun, and Lucasfilm is more hands-on with their writers than Marvel is. So I know them much better at Lucasfilm, where Marvel not so much. There's several layers of editorial between me and Marvel.
And and speaking of Marvel, how did that one kind of come along? Was that one after Star Wars?
Yeah, the Marvel came along because I did so well with Star Wars. My editor there, the head of the licensing department, was Sadie Smith, and we had a great relationship. And she liked me, and I liked her, and I did good work. So they put me right on Marvel. I'm trying to think. What was the first Marvel book? I don't know if it was Ultimate Marvel or Marvel Absolutely Everything You Need to Know, but I'd already done those formats for Star Wars. So I'd kind of proven myself that I could handle that the way those books are structured. So it was easy to jump in there. And then because I did well, then they put me on the Marvel Studios Visual Dictionary, which is kind of like the books that Pablo Hidalgo is famous for with Star Wars, his guides to the movies. I did a guide to the whole MCU at the time. It was a little scary at first because with the comics, because I really didn't grow up reading the comics. I, I, when I was a kid, there was the Spider-Man and Friends cartoon on TV that was and it's on Disney Plus now. That was, my introduction to Marvel. And there was the live-action Hulk TV show with Lou Ferrigno.
Yes.
And I didn't, as a kid, I didn't know the difference between Marvel and DC. It was all the same to me. So there was the Wonder Woman TV show and the Batman TV show. It was all kind of the same universe, the Superman movies, all of that. So those were my superheroes as a kid. I really didn't know much of the comics other than what appeared on TV and movies. But I had the experience, even with Star Wars, something I've loved my whole life. There were things about it I didn't know, especially stuff about the EU. So, I'd rely on Wikipedia, as a major resource. And you can use Wikipedia different ways. You can use it, you can just grab information or use it as a starting point, because what they do that's great is they have all the references, at the bottom. So they'll tell you, where the information comes from, which book or comic or whatever. And so then I could go there and I could read the source and get a little more context. So that was, I learned that I didn't have to know everything to write a book. And that's something also my professors at college taught me. They told me a lot of times a professor only knows the material lesson to lesson if they're teaching a new course. They don't necessarily know the whole semester, especially if they've never taught it before. They're just learning one step ahead of the students. So knowing that gave me a lot of confidence to approach things that I didn't know. I mean, I'd written whole guidebooks for whole countries, and before I started out, I hadn't been to any of those cities or provinces. I went to them as I wrote. So that's how I approached the Marvel Comics books. I learned them as I went. And there's lots of great resources for that. There's more than one wiki site for Marvel Comics. There's a bunch of pretty good sites. And Marvel's got their Marvel Unlimited subscription where you can read. They've got all their comics online except for the most recent 6 months. So that's great if you're writing a book because suddenly you've got access to all the comics. So that's really helpful. So yeah, it was daunting, but once I got through it, I realized, wow, I can do this. I can just write a whole library of Marvel books and learn it as I go. And so it worked out really well.
Well, speaking of, that was actually part of a question I was going to ask was, how do you do all the research? But tell me this, what is it like having to write such a diverse group of things versus telling a single story?
That does set Marvel apart, and that is hard because each Marvel character is kind of a universe unto themselves. So it does. I don't think anybody can have a whole view of Marvel. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's there's some crazy geeks out there that just absorb everything. But I think then you're not going to have time for Star Wars and other stuff. So I kind of did. I did. it was helpful because I had been watching the MCU movies. That was really what piqued my interest. That really convinced me. Yeah, I want to get into this Marvel stuff. So I had the MCU as a frame of reference, and it's easier when at least I knew something from the movies. But so I kind of had to approach it as the character backstories were the individual threads that I followed. And as I picked up the events and the backstories, I'd read about, various events, some of those big foundation tentpole events, and then I'd follow another character and they'd mention, I'm drawing a blank on names right now, but like the Secret Wars, or that one with all the different the multiverse comes together in different worlds, battle worlds and stuff. So I as I'm learning about the character backstories, they reference these events, and like Civil War and stuff like that. And so then as I learn more and more characters, then I'd get a sense of these events and maybe get to tie them together a little bit better. But and I'll learn which characters gravitate, who are their friends and enemies, and this one actually appeared over as an enemy of this other character in this other storyline. So I begin to make those connections in my brain of how it fits all together. But after doing a bunch of books, I think I've got a pretty good idea of the Marvel universe. I'm not going to know certain characters as well maybe as someone who's grown up on them, but grown up reading them. But then again, they're only going to know, a couple of their favorites to that extent. I've got more of a broader view of all the different characters. So there's some give and take. Nobody can be an expert in everything. That's something I've learned. So you can be an expert in some things, or a generalist, a little bit of everything. It's just there's a give and take, a trade-off in all of it.
Absolutely. Now, when you've been writing all these books, was there a particular character, whether it's Star Wars or Marvel, is there a particular character that you were like, I really, really enjoyed writing this particular bit?
I would say with Star Wars, I really enjoyed the Rebels stuff. Partly just because I got to come in, not even the ground level, the basement level. I was working on it the year before the shows aired. And that's something that's changed with Disney now. Writers don't get to see stuff in advance anymore. Even the people that are doing, that's why the novelizations come out late, because the writers couldn't see the movie until everybody else did. And that's why we get late guides to the shows and stuff. It's because Disney's everything's top secret. That's why toys now, we don't get toys with movies and shows anymore. They come out a year later, and just a few. We don't even get a full spread of action figures for characters. We just get the highlights because there's such a lag due to the secrecy. But with Rebels, I got to see everything that had been completed. As much as a year early, so I knew that Ahsoka was coming back. I knew the plans for the series, from the overall arc, from beginning to end, starting out. So that was very exciting because I'd never been exposed to that much advanced information, professionally or as a fan. So that was very exciting. And I remember the first material I saw for Rebels was images of Ezra and Chopper. And I remember how excited I was of those because it was fresh and it was new, but immediately I recognized that Chopper was based on a Ralph McQuarrie R2D2 concept. And I thought, wow, this is exciting. And I also noticed the color schemes, the oranges and yellows and greens and browns. It was all very much, it was a color scheme from Ralph McQuarrie paintings. It was his color palette. And I think that's something that's not even really discussed by the creators or fans. Even nuances like that, the color palette is all Ralph McQuarrie. So, and his Lethal, the capital city, that was a McQuarrie concept painting that the city was based on. So I knew right away, wow, this is getting right back to the material. And then I saw Zeb, who's a McQuarrie Chewbacca, and all of that, and just it was exciting to see that that they're getting back to their basics, to the roots of Star Wars. And this was the first thing that Dave Filoni was doing on his own without George Lucas, and the first thing Disney was putting out. So I thought, wow, they're getting off to a really fantastic start. And it was exciting also because, and this is, I do like to brag and I don't like to brag. But
Go ahead and brag.
Always overlooks, yeah. Everybody always overlooks, they talk about the first book of canon, which was John Jackson Miller's A New Dawn, the novel. It's true his book was the first canon novel, but My Rebels Guide was actually the first canon book. It was the first book published after the Disney reboot. And the facts, and I got to invent a good bit of facts and information for that book. So people often overlook that, but it's actually the first canon book. So I'm going to grab that bragging right there.
So now you said something interesting there. You got to invent some things for the book. What was that process like? When you ran into a situation, if I'm following you, you run into a situation where you need to talk about something that isn't yet explained, and you have to come up with how and why it makes sense.
Right. I don't remember exactly how that first came about. I probably had a discussion with the DK editors when I first started seeing the spreads, the pages, and what I had to fill in, and it would have immediately realized, oh, this is stuff that hasn't been defined. What are we supposed to do here? And I think they just said, they're happy to have you suggest information, and they'll just check it with the story group. And at the time, the relevant story group members were Leland Chi and Pablo Hidalgo. And I just started writing, and I tried to be respectful of what had come before. A lot of what I was making up were specifications for like ships and blasters, weapons and things. So like the manufacturer and the name of the weapon or ship, and the names of various parts, just materials, what these things are capable of doing. It was a lot of that. Not a lot of story items, but just names of things and specifications and parts and stuff. And I would always name them. I'd pull on names of things from existing canon, but also the EU and George Lucas's concepts of stuff. So, for instance, there were speeder. For instance, the Droids cartoon from the 1980s. In the end of one of the arcs, the good guys, they just leave the droids and they go off and become speeder bike engineers. And so I named some of the speeder bikes after them and the parts after those characters, as if those heroes in the Droids cartoon from the 80s had gone on and designed these speeder bikes themselves. So drawing that connection.
Very cool.
There were some things with Hera, I think her blaster or something, there had been a previous green Twi'lek rebel pilot. I forget her name, but she was in the Dark Horse comics. So I named some of the blaster specifications, after her. So I draw these connections, and it was a lot of fun. And Lucasfilm really liked what I did there with that book. So they kind of gave me carte blanche in subsequent books whenever something hadn't been designated yet, to make stuff up and just to point out, hey, I made this up, so that they knew to check it with Pablo or Leland. But so I had a lot of freedom there. I don't know whether other writers enjoy that same level of freedom now. I think things have tightened up a bit. I think other writers have to get permission to even do podcast interviews, which I don't have to. So yeah, I've enjoyed more freedom than some of them, but I think Disney's and it's understandable because we've seen other things ruined, secrets ruined in the past. There was infamously at Celebration, it was the Rogue One panel when they had all the casts on the stage, and Gwendolyn Christie was interviewing them one by one, and I don't remember the actor's name. I think he's a Japanese actor. He plays bass. And she got to him, it was towards the end of the whole panel, and she was asking him something, and he looked back at, the other cast, and he said, they all die. He dies, yes. And he dies, and she dies. And Gwendolyn Christie got this horrified look on her face, just abject horror. And she said, no, you can't say that, but he just kept going, and she had to say, stop, you can't, you can't keep, no. And then they tried their best to go on with it, but it was like, she knew what had happened, but there was nothing she could do because he just blurts it all out. And I think everyone in the audience was just, they couldn't believe what they heard. We're all in denial. We didn't hear what we just thought we heard, because the movie hadn't come out yet. It would be quite a while. So yeah, but there's other things, and the Hasbro toys for The Force Awakens, their figures I remember the prototypes for their Black Series figures all got leaked online. So, it happened, especially the Lego toys for years.
Mm-hmm. Lego has been notorious for releasing things before releasing images of the product before that information had been released in a trailer or anything.
Right. Yeah, for some reason, Lego seems to have a much longer requirement for development schedule. So Hasbro, I think it's like a year, but Lego, it seems like a year and a half or so. And so often, Lego even, you'll see in the finished product, you have concept. The characters and designs are actually the concepts and not the finished thing that you see in the movie. A really good example are from the Thor Ragnarok sets. Hela's minions are these black, what are they called? The black, I can't think of what they're called. They're the same word for the Asgardian soldiers, but black somethings. And they look like Venom, black berserkers. They look like Venom from the Spider-Man comics, big teeth and black and oily and lots of arms and tentacles and chain shape. And these appear as her minions in the Lego set. But you don't see them in the movie because that was just a concept. Later on, they switched them out with, the undead skeleton warriors. And so later they used a similar concept based on that for part of Thanos' army. But instead of black, they're more flesh-colored. Not quite the same, but very much based on that. But now finally we're going to see those black berserkers in this upcoming Thor movie, because they were in the comics. Those are Gore's minions, but they thought they'd borrow them for Hela's, because Hela uses Gore's sword. It was borrowed from Gore in the comics in Thor Ragnarok, but she got to keep that, but she lost her minions. But they made it into the Lego set. So yeah, Lego's weird about that.
That's so crazy. Well, you talked a little bit about sorry about that. I'll cut that out. You talked a little bit about you mentioned the story group and getting things approved. Now, did you actually get to work with Hidalgo or Dave Filoni directly at all?
Yeah, with Dave Filoni, I interviewed him for a really long time. It was over an hour. I think it was an hour and a half or maybe a couple of hours. It was amazing how much time he gave me. And then he went on to also write the intro to the Rebels Guide. I also interviewed Joel Aaron and Simon Kinberg. Simon Kinberg, I was really intimidated because this is the guy that made the X-Men movies and Deadpool movies and all kinds of other Hollywood blockbusters. This guy's the real deal. He's like a J.J. Abrams. And so I was a little intimidated, but thankfully the PR lady, Tracy Canobio at Lucasfilm, talked up my confidence to do that, because it was really fun to talk to him. But the sad thing was most of this never made it into the books. Just a few quotes. So, I've hoped one day, I could publish this stuff because it's great material. We talked about all the inspiration for Rebels and where they were going with it. So, and there's a lot of stuff in there that hasn't been probably hasn't been talked about before. But yeah, over the years I've talked with a lot of different people. Killian Plunkett, one of the head artists at Lucasfilm, who you don't hear about very much the last year or two. I hope he's still at Lucasfilm, but I don't know for sure. He's one of my favorites because he was an illustrator for the Dark Horse comics too, but he was big on the Clone Wars. And the other ones, Sam Witwer, Darth Maul and Starkiller, and one of my favorite illustrators, Terrell Whitlatch, who designed all the creatures for the prequels, and various ones. And with the story group, mostly I've worked with Pablo and Leland, a little bit with Matt Martin later on. But basically, they serve as kind of, for me, they served as a resource if I had questions. They could answer them. If I wanted access to something, they could connect me, to access to other creatives on certain levels, particularly artists. They've been able to connect me with. And also as proofreaders, to read through, make any corrections or suggestions, or say, hey, we can't go there, but let's go here instead. So that kind of thing. They're very, in my experience, very light-handed. Contrary to, I think, popular misunderstood belief, especially in the beginning. I think when the story group was announced, people assumed that the story group was writing the backstory and kind of writing the framework of Star Wars, where it was going to go. But that was not it at all. They're more just to be repositories of information, to know what people in different areas are working on, so that when they start to intersect, they can make sure that they intersect correctly, that they overlap seamlessly, so that there aren't contradictions and messes with the continuity. And that works on several levels, to make sure you get your facts straight, but also so you can pull in meaningful references to things. For instance, my Rebels Guide, I wrote about Kessel, and there were some fun things on that spread. I wrote about the Pikes. I made reference to the Pike Syndicate on Kessel, and that was just out of my interest because I always liked the Pikes. I liked them in the Clone Wars design just because they're so exotic and strange and alien and just cool. The great personalities. Now we see a very different iteration in the live action, but. So that was just by chance that I happened to include them in my description of Kessel, and they actually appear there later in Solo. I didn't know that. However, I think it was Pablo that added a reference in my book. He added the reference to there being a king and a royal family that live on the forested side of the moon of Kessel, and that they've kind of contracted out with the Pikes to mine there for spice. Now, I didn't know anything about the royal family or a forested end of the moon. That was bizarre to me because that's not what we see in Rebels, and I don't think that's what we ever saw in the EU. But Pablo knew that was part of George Lucas's wishes, I guess, from something. And eventually and it had been in the royal family in that forested side of the moon had appeared in an unfinished episode of Clone Wars already. But it was one of those episodes before I wrote the book, but it had never aired. So Pablo added that, and then later on Disney Plus, Disney authorized those episodes to be finished and put on where we actually see the king and the royal family on that side of the moon. So there's interesting things like that where the story group can make meaningful connections that the author isn't privy to. So those are really great, and they might, they might pay off simultaneously or several years down the road.
Well, that's pretty amazing. Well, Adam, I want to honor your time, and it has been great having you on the podcast today. Now, you told me there's not anything new that you're working on, at least not that you can share with me at this point. But is there anything that you've released recently that maybe people aren't up to speed on?
Let's see. My newest Marvel book that's out is the Marvel Encyclopedia. That's the landmark book of the Marvel Comics. And there's Ultimate Star Wars, the newest edition with Darth Vader on the cover. But mostly for now, people can follow me on Twitter, or Facebook, or Instagram. And the username is at author Adam Bray, all one word, for those 3 accounts. I'm on YouTube as well. I haven't posted anything in a long while, but I like to especially link my podcast appearances if they're on YouTube, so I'll connect them to my YouTube account. So it's a great place there to see where I'm appearing, because I usually am doing a few appearances every month on podcasts. So those are good to find me. I have a website at adambray.com. It's not been interviewed in a while, or not been updated in a while. And people can order signed copies of my books directly from me. That's a big help as well. And my email address is there on my website at the top.
Awesome. Well, I'll put links to all of that down in the show notes below. Adam, it has been fantastic having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here anytime.
It was great getting to know Adam Bray. Check out the links in the show notes below to follow Adam or to purchase one of his books. I also hope that you'll check out the bonus episodes we're releasing on Fridays periodically over the summer. I'm joined by the host of The Reverend and the Reprobate podcast, Lucas Pinkard and Dan Gibson, the host of Fangirling Over Jesus, Ashley Cox, the host of the Speaking Nerdy podcast, Mike Schilling, and the great BB Nate from the Tatooine Sons podcast, as we do an actual play of the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game playtest. Check out the bonus episodes and each of their podcasts for lots of fun and inspiration. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, click the bell, click all those links, whatever they are. That way you'll be informed every time we put out new content, and you can keep up with what's going on. And you can find all of our social links to our YouTube channel, and to our online store at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. I do want to take a moment to encourage you to join us as a supporter on Patreon. We've changed all of our Patreon levels very recently, and every level has some great benefits and makes a huge difference in the ministry we are able to do. Supporters will also get to hear exclusive stories of believers we are serving around the world through our ministry partners. To check it out or to partner with us, go to patreon.com/ChristianNerdsUnite or go to ChristianNerdsUnite.com and click on the support menu. And while you're at it, I want to thank our current Patreon supporters, Sem, Peter, Joe, Jared, and our newest supporter, Ryan. Thanks so much for your support. You are really making a difference. Before you go, I do want to leave you with this blessing from Psalm 20. May the Lord answer you when you are in distress. May the Lord of the God of Jacob protect you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and grant you support from Zion. We'll see you next week. Blessings.